I woke up to my roommate standing over my bed, not sitting on the edge, not leaning in from the doorway to check if I was breathing, standing, perfectly still, close enough that I could smell the hospital soap still on her hands, in the dark, at whatever ungodly hour it was. For a second, I thought I was still dreaming. Then my eyes adjusted, and I saw her face, and I knew I wasn't. She didn't jump back. She didn't apologize, or laugh it off, or make up some story about a spider on the ceiling. She just went completely still, the way an animal goes still when it's already decided that running won't help. Her hand was hovering an inch above the book on my nightstand, fingers frozen mid-motion, like she'd been caught reaching into a fire. Then she leaned down, close enough that I felt her breath on my cheek, and she whispered 5 words I still hear some nights when the house is quiet. You weren't supposed to wake up. I want to tell you I sat straight up and demanded an explanation right then. I didn't. I lay there, heart going, and said nothing, because some part of me, some slow, stubborn, cowardly part of me, was already deciding not to ask. But I'm getting ahead of myself. None of that will make sense yet, so let me back up. My name is Daniel Cole. I'm 34 years old. I tune and restore pianos for a living, out of a workshop 2 blocks from my house that used to belong to a man named Sal Petrosino, who taught me the trade when I was 22 and didn't have anywhere else to be. It's slow work. You can't rush a soundboard that's cracked in 3 places, and you can't force a hammer felt back into shape any faster than it wants to go. I've never minded that. I notice things other people walk past, a string half a hair sharp, a hinge that's starting to complain, a person who said, "I'm fine, one time too many." I just don't always say what I notice out loud. That part of this story is on me, and I know it. I bought my house 6 years ago with a woman named Elise, back when I still believed you could plan your whole life out in advance if you were careful enough. 3 weeks before the wedding, she left a note on the kitchen counter and was gone by the time I got home from the shop. I never chased her down to ask why. Some cousin of hers told me the real reason 2 years later at a funeral, like it was nothing. I'd spent 2 years not knowing because I hadn't been able to make myself ask. That's the kind of man I was already becoming before Maren Voss ever set foot in my house. She moved into the spare room 3 years ago, on my sister's word alone. Renata, Ren, to everyone who's known her longer than a week, worked hospice nursing with Maren before Ren left the floor for hospital administration, and when Ren heard I had an empty room and a mortgage I could barely carry solo, she didn't ask me, she just told me. Her name's Maren. She's quiet, she works nights, she pays on time, and she will not steal your good pans. That was the entire interview. Maren showed up on a Tuesday with 2 duffel bags, a duffel bag's worth of nursing scrubs, and a chipped porcelain mug wrapped in a bath towel like it was something precious. It was my mother's mug. Cream-colored, hand-painted piano keys around the rim, 1 hairline crack running down the handle that had been there since before I could remember. I'd left it behind at Elise's when I moved my things out in a hurry, and somehow, through some chain of packing boxes and second-hand furniture I never fully understood, it had ended up in a box of kitchen odds and ends that got passed to Ren, and Ren had given it to Maren without either of them knowing what it meant to me. Maren found it in a cabinet her first week, liked the pattern, and started using it. I saw it in her hand on day 4 and didn't say anything, because by then I'd already decided I liked watching her use it more than I minded explaining where it came from. That became the whole shape of the next 3 years, honestly. Small things I didn't explain, and small things I let go unexplained, stacking up quietly in a house with 2 people in it. Somewhere in month 2, without either of us deciding it out loud, Maren started making coffee before her overnight shifts ended, and mine began, and leaving a cup in that same mug on the counter for me, still warm, before she went to bed. I never asked her to. She never mentioned doing it. I just came downstairs one morning, found it waiting, and understood we'd started a ritual neither of us had agreed to out loud. 3 years later, it was still happening. Some mornings I'd catch her on her way up the stairs, half asleep in her scrubs, and she'd just lift 2 fingers off the mug handle in a little wave before disappearing into her room. I told myself that was normal roommate behavior for a long time. It wasn't, and some part of me knew it wasn't, but knowing a thing and saying it out loud are two very different acts, and I've always been better at the first one. She worked hospice nursing at a facility 20 minutes north, 12-hour shifts, 3 or 4 nights a week, sometimes back-to-back. It's not a job people ask a lot of follow-up questions about, and I noticed early that Maren didn't offer much either. I knew her mother had died when Maren was 23, fast, an aggressive cancer that took 11 weeks start to finish. And I knew that was more or less why she'd gone into hospice work in the first place. She'd told me that much over dinner in our first month. Flat and quick, the way people tell you things they've already decided not to dwell on. I never pushed past what she offered. I figured if she wanted to say more, she would. There was a Thursday routine, too, on weeks her schedule lined up right. If she wasn't working, we'd split a pizza from the place on Grant Street and watch reruns of some old detective show neither of us could remember the name of anymore, and I'd usually fall asleep on the couch around the second episode, and she'd usually let me, throwing the same gray blanket over my legs before she went up to bed, instead of waking me to do it myself. I never asked her to do that either. I just kept noticing, the way I notice a hairline crack in a soundboard long before it splits all the way through. Not alarmed by it exactly, just aware, filing it away as a fact about the house I lived in, without examining too closely what the fact might mean. What I didn't know, what I had no way of knowing yet, was that Maren had been writing me letters for over a year. Letters she never intended to send. Letters she kept in an old cigar box that used to belong to her father, tucked on the highest shelf of the hall closet behind a box of Christmas lights, where she assumed no one would ever have a reason to look. She wrote in them on nights she couldn't sleep after a hard shift, when a patient had died holding a stranger's hand because family hadn't made it in time, when the whole unfairness of endings sat too heavy on her to just go to bed. She told me later that writing to me felt safer than saying anything to my face, because a letter she never sent could never change anything, and Maren, more than almost anyone I've known, was terrified of things changing. That's the part of the story I didn't have yet, on the night I woke up and found her standing over my bed. All I had was the moment itself, and the 5 words, and the sound of her walking quickly back to her own room afterward, and the choice I made, to lie there in the dark and not follow her, not ask, not turn on the light, and demand to know what she'd been doing an inch above my nightstand at 2 in the morning. So let me tell you what actually happened that night, because I've replayed it enough times since to know exactly how it went. It was a Thursday, the second week of March, and Maren had come off a rough shift. I knew that much, before she even walked through the door, because she always came in quieter after a bad one, set her keys down without the usual jingle drop onto the counter, moved through the kitchen like she was trying not to wake a house full of sleeping people, even though it was just the 2 of us. I'd been asleep since around 11. My phone read 2:14 a.m. when I woke up, though I didn't check it until afterward. In the moment, all I had was the dark, and her shape beside my bed, and the specific, electric wrongness of a person standing exactly where a person shouldn't be standing at that hour. She had a folded piece of paper in her hand. I didn't clock that detail until much later, replaying it. At the time, all I registered was her face, and how close it was, and the way her whole body had locked up the second my eyes opened. My copy of the Goldberg Variations, the one she'd given me for my birthday 2 years before, sat on the nightstand where it always sat, spine cracked from use, and her free hand had been hovering right above it when I woke. "Maren," I said. My voice came out rough, still half asleep. She didn't answer right away. In the dark, I could see her jaw working, like she was deciding between 4 different sentences and hating all of them. "Go back to sleep," she said finally, which wasn't an answer to anything. "What are you doing?" "Checking on you." She said it too fast. I thought I heard something. "From your room. I was making sure you were okay." It wasn't true, and I think we both knew I knew it wasn't true, but I didn't call it out. That's the choice I made. I said, "Okay," and nothing else, and she left, and I lay there listening to her door click shut down the hall, replaying those 5 words on a loop. You weren't supposed to wake up. Turning them over like a stone, with no obvious face on either side. I did notice, before I fell back asleep, that the corner of a folded paper was tucked into the pages of the Goldberg Variations that hadn't been there the night before. I noticed it, and then I made the second choice of that night, which was not to open the book and look. I told myself I was respecting her privacy. That's true, as far as it goes, but if I'm being honest, and this whole story only works if I am, I think I was also afraid of what a folded piece of paper hidden in a book by my bed at 2 in the morning might actually say, and afraid of what I'd have to do about it if I found out. So I left the paper where it was. I got up the next morning, and there was coffee waiting in my mother's mug, still warm, and Marin was already asleep behind her closed door, and I drank it standing at the counter like every other morning of the last 3 years, and I told myself that was normal. It wasn't, obviously, but it took me a while longer to admit that to myself, and even longer to do anything about it. For about 2 weeks after that night, nothing changed on the surface, and everything changed underneath it. I started noticing things I'd apparently been choosing not to notice for years. The way Marin went quiet whenever I mentioned anything about the future in even the most harmless sense, a vacation someday, a kitchen renovation, whether the lease would auto-renew again in June. The way she flinched, almost imperceptibly, any time I asked what she'd been doing up so late. The way she always found a reason to be somewhere else when I got home from the shop earlier than usual. And there was proof stacking up too, in the other direction, small proof, none of it dramatic on its own, but it added up if you were paying attention, and by then, I was. She started texting me updates from her shifts that she'd never bothered with before. Nothing important. Slow night, 3 admissions, don't wait up. But she hadn't done that in 3 years, and now she was doing it 2 or 3 times a week. When my truck wouldn't start on a Tuesday, she was the one who drove me to the shop before her own shift, 20 minutes out of her way, and didn't mention it again. When I came down with a stomach flu that knocked me flat for 4 days, she left ginger ale and crackers outside my door every morning before she left for work, without a word. The way you'd leave something for someone you didn't want to make a fuss about caring for. None of it was a confession. All of it was a pattern, and I'm a man who spends his working life listening for patterns in things other people can't hear. A string that's a fraction sharp, a joint that's starting to give. I heard this one, I just didn't know yet what it was telling me, or what I was supposed to do about it. Wren had been needling me about Marin in her own way for years by then, long before any of this started. A comment at Thanksgiving about how I'd started saying "we" without noticing, a raised eyebrow any time I mentioned something Marin had said or done, a running joke that she was going to put both our names on the same holiday card whether we liked it or not. I'd always waved it off as my sister being my sister. It didn't feel like waving off anything, in the moment. It felt like static, background noise from someone who'd appointed herself the family's unofficial matchmaker a long time ago and never really stopped. I didn't understand yet that Wren wasn't joking, or at least not only joking. She was watching, the way she'd always watched out for me since our mother died, and she was waiting for me to catch up to something she'd already decided was obvious. The first real crack in the surface came about 3 weeks after that night, on a Sunday afternoon, when I went looking for a spool of piano wire I thought I'd stored in the hall closet behind the Christmas lights. I moved the box aside, and there, on the top shelf, tucked back further than anything needed to be, was a cigar box, cedar, dented at one corner, with her father's initials, RV, burned crooked into the lid. I didn't open it. I want that on the record, because it would have been easy, and I thought about it longer than I'm proud of. But I put the Christmas lights back exactly the way they'd been, and I left the box where it was, and I didn't say a word to Marin about finding it. I told myself, again, that I was respecting something. Looking back, I think I was buying time, the same way I'd bought time with Elise's note on the counter, collecting evidence of a truth I wasn't ready to hold yet. I did mention it to my sister, though, which is how Wren ended up in the middle of all this. Wren and I have dinner every other Sunday, a habit we started after our mother passed and never broke. 2 weeks after I found the cigar box, over her kitchen table, I told her, carefully, leaving out the box, leaving out most of it, that something had shifted with Marin, and I didn't know what to do about it. Wren put her fork down and looked at me, the way she's looked at me since we were kids, like she could see straight through whatever I was pretending not to say. "Danny," she said, "how long has it been since Elise?" 5 years. You know that. And in 5 years, how many times have you actually told a woman how you felt about her, out loud, before it was too late to matter? I didn't answer, because the honest answer was 0, and we both knew it. I didn't put Marin in your spare room so you could spend 3 years quietly noticing things about her and never say a single one of them out loud, Wren said. I put her there because I thought you two might actually be good together, if you ever got out of your own way long enough to find out. It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. You're just choosing the complicated version because it's safer. She reached over and tapped the table in front of me, hard, the way she used to get my attention as a kid. You didn't ask Elise why she left. You let 2 years go by not knowing, because not knowing hurt less than asking might have. Are you really going to do that again? With someone who's still here? I didn't have an answer for her that night. I drove home, turning her words over the whole way, and when I walked in, the mug was sitting on the counter, empty, rinsed, upside down on the drying rack, the way Marin always left it when she'd finished her shift and gone to bed. I stood there, looking at it longer than a mug deserves to be looked at. 3 days later, Marin asked me to dinner at the diner 2 streets over from the shop, Baker's, the kind of place with vinyl booths and a pie case by the register, where we'd gone maybe a dozen times over the years, always easy, never loaded. This one felt different from the second we sat down. She kept turning her water glass in slow half circles and not drinking from it. I have to tell you something, she said, about 10 minutes in, after we'd ordered and the small talk had run dry. There's a travel contract. Denver. 13 months, hospice care, better money than I've ever made here. She was watching the glass, not me. I have to give them an answer by the end of the month. Okay, I said, because it seemed like the safe thing to say, and because I hadn't yet learned my lesson about what safe things cost. Okay? Something flickered across her face, not anger, more like disappointment, like she'd been hoping for a different 2 syllables. That's it? What do you want me to say, Marin? She opened her mouth, and I watched her get right up to the edge of something. I could see it, the way you can see a hairline crack about to finally split all the way through a soundboard, and then she pulled back. Nothing, she said. Forget it. I just wanted you to hear it from me before I made a decision. We finished dinner talking about nothing. I paid. She thanked me, quiet, and we drove home in a silence that had 100 things buried in it, and not one of them spoken. I called Wren the next morning, before I'd even had coffee. She's leaving, I said. Denver, 13 months. She told me last night like she was reading off a weather report. And what did you say? I said okay. Wren was quiet long enough that I could hear her set something down on her end of the line. Danny, she finally said, I love you, but I swear to God, if you let this woman get on a plane without ever finding out what she's actually been trying to tell you for the last month, I am going to lose my mind. What is it you think she's been trying to tell me? I don't know exactly, but I saw her 3 weeks ago at the hospital cafeteria, and she asked me, completely out of nowhere, whether I thought some people were just built to ruin good things by waiting too long to say them. I thought she meant herself. Now I'm starting to wonder if she meant you. Or both of you. A pause. There's a cigar box, isn't there? You mentioned a cigar box, then changed the subject so fast I got whiplash. I hadn't told her about the box. I'd let it slip anyway, apparently, the way I let most things slip when I was trying hardest to hide them. I found it, I admitted. I didn't open it. Of course you didn't. I could hear her rubbing her temples through the phone. Daniel, you have maybe 3 weeks before she gets on a plane and decides this house was just a place she used to live. I am telling you, as your sister, as someone who has watched you do this exact thing with Elise, and then spend 2 years wondering what you missed. Go find out what's in the box. Or better yet, don't. Go ask her, to her face, before you have to guess for the next 5 years instead. I didn't go straight to the closet when I hung up. I want to be honest about that too. It took me another 4 days. 4 days of watching Marin move around the kitchen like a woman carrying something heavy she wouldn't set down, before I finally climbed the step stool in the hall closet, moved the Christmas lights aside, and lifted the cigar box down with both hands like it might go off. Marin was on a night shift. I had the house to myself, and about 6 hours before she'd be home, and I sat down on the hallway floor with the box in my lap and made myself open it. There were 11 letters inside, folded the same careful way each time. None of them dated, none of them addressed to anyone by name on the outside. I only read 3 before I heard her car in the driveway 2 hours early. Her shift had ended short-staffed and slow, she told me later, and I had just enough time to shove the box back onto the shelf, badly, one corner sticking too far forward, before she came through the door. But I'd already read enough. The first letter talked about the mug, about how she'd found it in a box from Wren's place and liked the piano keys before she knew whose it had been, and how she'd started making coffee in it every morning, half out of habit and half because some stubborn, hopeful part of her liked imagining what my face looked like drinking from it before I was even awake to see her do it. The second talked about the Goldberg variations, about buying it for my birthday because she'd heard me hum 3 bars of it while I worked on a soundboard in the shop one Saturday she'd come by to drop off my lunch, and about how she'd stood in the bookstore for 20 minutes deciding whether that was too much to give a man she rented a room from. The third, the one that stopped me cold, sitting on that hallway floor, was the newest, dated only by the ink, still faintly blue-black, instead of faded, like the older ones. It said she didn't know how to tell me she'd been in love with me for at least 2 years, maybe longer, and that she'd started writing these letters instead of saying anything out loud because a letter never sent could never wreck a good thing, could never make me look at her differently, could never end with her packing 2 duffel bags again, the way she had after her mother died, and her father remarried 8 months later, and the house she'd grown up in stopped feeling like it belonged to her. She'd been terrified of losing another home by asking for too much from the people in it. That night in March, she wrote, she'd finally worked up the nerve to slip that very letter into my book while I slept, meaning to leave it there for me to find on my own, in daylight, when she wasn't in the room to watch my face change. And then I'd woken up, and she'd panicked, and she'd taken it back before I could see it, and she'd been carrying it in that box ever since, unsent, exactly like all the others. When Marin walked in that afternoon, 2 hours early, I was standing at the kitchen counter with my hands flat on it, staring at nothing, and she took one look at my face and went pale. "What's wrong?" she said. "I read the letters," I said. 3 of them. "I'm sorry. I should have asked you first. I know that. But I read them, and I'm not sorry I know what's in them, even if I'm sorry about how I found out." She didn't move for a long moment. Then, very quietly, "Which 3? The mug, the Goldberg variations, and the one from March." Her hand came up to cover her mouth, and for a second, I thought she might actually leave the room, walk straight back out the door she'd just come through. Instead, she pulled out a kitchen chair and sat down hard, like her legs had stopped agreeing to hold her up. "I was going to tell them no," she said, so quiet I almost missed it. "Denver. I decided this morning, on my drive home, I was going to turn it down, and I still wasn't going to tell you why, because telling you why felt like handing you something you never asked me to carry. Marin. I've watched people say goodbye to the people they love my entire career," she said, and her voice cracked right down the middle of the sentence. "Every single night, for 11 years, I know exactly how it goes, when you let yourself need someone, and then that person is gone. My mother, 11 weeks, and my father remarried so fast it was like watching someone erase a whole life with a damp cloth. I didn't want that for either of us. I thought if I never said it, it couldn't be taken away, because you can't lose something you never let yourself have. You've had it," I said. "You've had it for years. I just never said it back." "Why not?" Her voice cracked on the second word. "If you knew, if some part of you knew, why did you let me keep writing letters I was too scared to hand you?" "Because I was scared too," I said. "Not of you, of what happens after. Elise taught me that saying the real thing out loud is how you find out it can be taken away." It's easier to just keep noticing quietly and never test it. I shook my head. That's not an excuse. It's just the truest answer I've got. She looked up at me then, eyes wet. And for the first time since I'd known her, she looked like she genuinely didn't know what was about to happen next. I didn't ask why Elise left, I told her, and my own voice wasn't steady either. For 2 years, I didn't ask. I let a stranger tell me the real reason, at a funeral, because I couldn't stand to hear it from the person it actually happened to. Ren's been telling me for a month that I was about to do the exact same thing to you. Let you get on a plane and spend the next 5 years wondering what I never said, instead of just saying it before you left. I came around the counter and crouched down in front of her chair so we were level. I woke up that night in March, and you were standing there, and you told me I wasn't supposed to wake up. You were right. I wasn't supposed to, but I did, and some part of me has been awake ever since, even if it took me 3 more weeks to actually say anything about it. Say it then, she said. Actually say it, out loud. I need to hear it out loud, not folded up in a book. I love you, I said. I think I have for longer than I've let myself admit, and I should have said it the morning after I found that paper corner sticking out of my book, instead of leaving it there like a coward for 3 weeks. I'm sorry it took this long. I'm not sorry it's true. She made a sound that was half laugh, half something closer to crying, and reached up and pulled me the rest of the way toward her, and for a long moment neither of us said anything else, because there wasn't anything left that needed saying out loud right then. She turned down Denver 2 days later. Not because I asked her to. I made sure of that, made sure she knew the offer to wait for her, if that's what she'd wanted, was real, but because, in her words, some things you're finally ready to stop running from once somebody's actually standing still with you. Ren likes to say she saw it coming before either of us did, and she's not wrong. 2 months after that afternoon on the hallway floor, I asked Marin to marry me in the workshop, standing next to the same upright piano she used to drop my lunch off beside on Saturdays, and she said yes before I'd even finished the sentence. We were engaged for 11 months, long enough for both of us to be sure, not so long that either of us was still quietly waiting for the other one to go first. 14 months later, we got married in Ren's backyard in October, under a maple tree that was already halfway through turning color, with about 40 people and a folding table bar and my old mentor Sal playing a battered upright piano he and I had spent 3 weekends tuning back into shape for the occasion. Marin wore her mother's earrings and carried a small bouquet of whatever was still blooming that late in the year. Ren cried before either of us did, and has never let either of us forget it. The morning of the wedding, before anyone else was awake in the house, I came downstairs and found coffee waiting for me on the counter, in a cream-colored mug with hand-painted piano keys and one hairline cracked down the handle, exactly the way it had waited for me almost every morning for the past 4 years. Marin was sitting at the kitchen table already dressed, watching me drink it with the particular look she still gets sometimes, like she's checking to make sure something good is actually still real. The cigar box sits on our dresser now, out in the open, no longer hidden behind a box of Christmas lights. There are 17 letters in it these days instead of 11, because we kept writing them, except now we read them to each other the same week they're written, out loud, over that same mug of coffee, before either of us has time to lose our nerve. The newest one, the one she wrote the morning of the wedding, doesn't say anything about being afraid to lose a home anymore. It just says she's glad she woke up that night, and gladder still that I did too. Looking back on all of it now, I think about how close we both came to losing years we didn't have to lose, just because we were each waiting for the other person to go first. So tell me, if you'd woken up to someone standing over your bed, whispering that you weren't supposed to see what they were about to leave behind, would you have let it go the way I almost did, or would you have turned the light on right then and asked? And more than that, have you ever loved someone quietly for longer than you'd ever admit out loud, because some part of you was more afraid of losing them by speaking up than of losing them slowly, by saying nothing at all? Tell me your story in the comments. I read every one of them. And if you liked this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.